Hi everyone, welcome back to Linger Longer with Books. My name's Catherine, and in this week's video I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on Hamnet the movie. What really struck me watching it on the big screen is the time that was spent, probably around the first 30 minutes I would say, although I wasn't keeping track of time, where director Chloe Zhao really builds a sense of place for the story to unfold. So in particular, we have the kind of the lush green woodland, the forests space on which would have been depicting the outskirts of Stratford upon Avon, where Agnes and William sort of live and work and have their lives. So you get a real sense with Agnes in particular that she's just at one with the woodland and she's drawn to it very, very naturally. She has a hawk that she trains and spends a lot of her time. She just wants to be in amongst the forest canopy and almost like the roots of the trees, and that is beautifully shot. Not quite sure where they filmed it, but if you do know, pop it in the comments. That sort of detail I'm always curious to find out. But it's there on the outskirts of Stratford upon Avon, which is in the middle belt of England essentially, that Agnes sort of encounters William Shakespeare. William is the Latin tutor to a couple of her siblings, I understand. Agnes lives with her family, but you get a sense that she wants more from her life. She's a deep thinker, and she strikes up this connection with William. And from there on in, they start a relationship, and then they are soon engaged, but in Shakespearean times that would be known as betrothed. So the scene setting, that kind of world building and that environment of a very sort of, I guess, a slower pace of life than, obviously it's no comparison to modern day, but people lived off the land. They made their trade. They were tradespeople. William's father is a glove maker. How they did their washing, how they cooked, how they harvested, all of those things really, really come to life, not only in kind of your mind, but visually right in front of you on the big screen. So I thought the cinematography was beautiful and should get all of the awards that it can get hold of, basically. So next up, I thought we would look at the characters themselves and the portrayals by the actors. So we have Jessie Buckley as Agnes, and we have Paul Mescal as William Shakespeare. So as I said, with the character of Agnes played by Jessie Buckley, she, I believe, is younger than William Shakespeare when they marry, but there is a real spiritual side to Agnes. She kind of is in tune with her body. There are rumours that her family and herself are kind of kind of witch descendants. Nothing malicious in that, but just people aren't quite sure of Agnes. But once Agnes gives birth to their first daughter, she's a really natural, loving mother. And then comes along a very dramatic scene in the film where Agnes gives birth to what they think is one baby, but actually turns out to be twins. Sorry, still getting over my cough. And that really pulls at your heartstrings, because the second baby is delivered. Or was it the first baby? Sorry, can't quite remember, but one of the babies isn't breathing. And they kind of cast it off as it's passed away. But actually that isn't the case. The baby takes a breath after what probably feels like an absolute lifetime, but sort of a handful of seconds. And from there on in, they build that family of 5. So they have the 3 children now. And what Jessie Buckley does just amazingly well is you get this sort of feeling that she is completely Agnes. She has kind of embodied her character fully. And what I have to say about Jessie, the absolutely heartbreaking scene where you have this big dilemma, this big dramatic build up, which you don't really see coming. So Judith, the twin sister, wakes up one morning, or is pretty unresponsive in bed. Hamnet calls for help, and then Agnes sort of sets to work nursing Judith all hours of the day and night with all these kind of natural remedies and potions and what you think would have been their sort of medical and first aid kind of elements back in that day, probably 500 years ago now. And there is, and again, these are complete plot spoilers if you haven't seen the film or read the book. But what essentially happens is Judith is at death's door. William is racing back from where he's gone to London, and Judith recovers, but really, really unexpectedly, Hamnet goes down with the deadly fever, or quite kind of, is it the plague? I'm not quite sure what they've actually got, but something deadly. And Hamnet dies, and the scene where Agnes realises that Hamnet is dying and actually dies, and the howl that she gives out will absolutely leave you in tears. I defy anyone to watch that scene and not be moved by it anyway, even if you're not a teary person. And I think there are very few actresses that could, of a certain calibre, that could actually kind of pull that scene off, if that makes sense. My words aren't really doing it justice. But if you haven't seen it and you do see it, I think you will know exactly what I'm saying. So the upshot is, I think Jessie Buckley does an amazing portrayal of Agnes. She is feisty. She is as worldly as she can be. She is determined, she is loving, she is kind, and she then navigates an entire kind of nightmare field of grief and loss with one of her children. So that's what I would say about Agnes. But what do I think about Paul Mescal as William Shakespeare? With Paul Mescal as William Shakespeare, obviously that is no small feat to take on the most famous playwright in the world. And what I think Paul does really well is he has that presence on the camera. He is, importantly, and not sort of in a simple way, but he is the right age, I think, to be playing Shakespeare. Sometimes films can cast actors that are just not the right fit in that way, but I think Paul has that kind of charisma, that warmth, and that love that comes across on the screen between him and Agnes. What Paul then does brilliantly well is there is this kind of inner turmoil in William, and Agnes realises William's not sleeping properly, he's not eating properly, and she realises that he's yearning for more in his life, that he can't just settle in Stratford upon Avon, which is quite a rural community. What career is he going to carve out? And you see him writing and sort of ultimately needing to be elsewhere for that creativity and that inspiration. So Agnes, what she does is really selflessly, she says to William, go off to London and do what you need to do in terms of making yourself happy and self-fulfilled with your career and who you are as a person, because you're kind of no good to us. I love you as my husband, you're a loving father, but you are no good to us. You are kind of like frozen and just not up to scratch as you currently are. So you do get this real sense of love you might have heard that knock at the door. So there was a brief interlude, some friends knocked the door. So now I will continue. So I was saying, you do get that sense of a strong, loving bond between Agnes and Will. But if I, and apologies, because I am going to sort of flip backwards and forwards in terms of how the film panned out to describe their love now. So when Hamnet dies a little later on in the movie, what you get a real kind of understanding through what's not said between Agnes and Will. They seem unable to communicate their emotions to one another, and what Will does, as we know him to be Shakespeare, is he will write emotions through his plays, which is exactly what he does in this awful kind of tragedy, is that he goes off and he just pours his heart out on paper and writes what we now know to be in the world as the play Hamlet. And in the movie, we see Agnes and her brother travel to the Globe Theatre in London to watch what is being hailed as Shakespeare's latest play on stage, and that being Hamlet. So there is this amazingly powerful performance, again, from Paul Mescal and Jessie Buckley. Agnes is watching from the sort of the groundlings of the Globe. She's watching the play standing, and she's kind of got the stage right in front of her, and she's just being kind of swept up in this portrayal of a young Hamlet that dies in the play, and there are sort of visions of ghosts and there's death, and it's stirring all these kind of feelings in Agnes, and she starts to kind of see what William is feeling but has been unable to say to her so far. And I think that kind of reignites that bond and that understanding between them, or that's very much the sense that I had as the viewer of the film on the big screen. Sorry, random cough. So there you have it. That is my thoughts on Hamnet the movie. My takeaways are amazing performances, beautifully shot, just a heartbreaking story that will be tough to watch over and over again, obviously, but just a window into the lives of William Shakespeare, who is sort of loved the world over. His legacy is his writing and his plays, but the mystery very much exists. The mystery and the myth, I guess, of the man himself. Who was he? And I think this film really captures one sort of view into that, and I hope it gets all the awards that it's nominated for. I will be rooting for it at the Oscars. But there you go. Those are my thoughts on Hamnet the movie, and I highly recommend you watching it, and I highly recommend you picking up a copy of the book if you haven't already. Actually, I think one other thing that I should say, which would be amiss to not include, is the amazing performance by the young actor who plays Hamnet himself. Just gets so much of the emotion through as a sort of a loving brother, as a doting son. He misses his dad. He's got a really strong kind of feelings towards his dad and being the boy, and William being sort of in and out of their lives, being quite transient with that, and really wanting to kind of form a strong bond with his dad, and still being so young. But he was brilliant. Sorry, I can't recall the actor's name straight off the top of my head, but particularly when he dies, and there's a moment where at the end Hamnet is on stage, and just so much is said from his eyes that sort of dialogue and words are just not needed. You can absolutely sense what he's feeling and thinking in those moments. So yeah, beautifully acted, and probably once in a lifetime film as well. But for those of you who regularly tune into my videos, you know I do a call out, which I haven't done for the last few videos because my flu kind of addled brain has forgotten. But leave me a related emoji in the comments box below to let me know that you've watched this far. And because we have been speaking about Shakespeare, I think the only true and logical emoji would be the theatre masks emoji. So leave me that in the comments below. Let me know if you read the book, what you think. If you've seen the film, what do you think? Do you think that the film does the book justice, essentially? I would love to know your thoughts. I think it does. I was very pleased to know that Maggie O'Farrell was heavily involved in the production and the making of the movie. I think that's always a good sign when the author is. But yes, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you've got a great book on the go at the moment. What am I reading? Oh, I've just started Caller Unknown by Gillian McAllister. That is a proof copy. That's out in April. So hijinks, high drama, high emotion, a ransom scenario. So won't say any more on that right now. But anyway, I shall sign off here and I shall see you in next week's video. Bye.